Good morning and welcome to your Wednesday, April 29th edition of Mark Madness. Today I want to follow up on yesterday's video that spoke of Mark 8:31 to 33. And in yesterday's video, I spoke on the phrase must suffer. That Jesus says the Son of Man must suffer. And I said that this wasn't simply Jesus predicting his death. Rather, it is much more significant than that. It is Jesus saying that his suffering and his ultimate death is absolutely necessary. There's no way around it. It has to happen. But the question is why? Why must Jesus suffer? Why must Jesus die? Jesus doesn't really answer in that detail in the Gospel of Mark. Rather, the New Testament and other places, especially through the Apostle Paul's writings, we get to see a description of why Jesus must suffer, why he had to die. And so today I want you to think about the theology of his suffering and his death. And I'm going to think about it in terms of the atonement. Now, the atonement is a fancy theological word that basically speaks of the reconciliation between God and humanity. That God and his image bearers have a gap that was caused because of sin, original sin, and our repeated sin. And the atonement is the process of bringing us back together into a right relationship with God. The word one, O-N-E, is at the center of the word atonement. And that can be a helpful device for remembering what atonement is all about. It's about bringing these two parties who are against one another to become one in their relationship with one another. And there are different descriptions about how the atonement takes place. It is always centered on the person of Jesus Christ, and it is always centered on his death and his resurrection. But exactly why must it take place? Throughout the Bible and even throughout history, there are different ways of explaining atonement. And I'm going to link to 2 3-minute videos that that provide different descriptions of the atonement. One is the Christus Victor view of the atonement. And this is Jesus' ultimate defeat of evil, Satan, and even of death itself. And this is a common theme throughout the New Testament. So this 3-minute video will talk about Christus Victor, that he went to the cross in order to defeat sin, evil, death, and Satan. Another common view of the atonement is called penal substitution. And this is where Jesus Christ takes the penalty that we deserve. And I'm going to link to another 3-minute video that describes penal substitution. Now, the first minute and a half of that video is talking about economics and the housing collapse. You're on the right video. It's just using that as an illustration to demonstrate penal substitution. And I want to highlight one thing about penal substitution that sometimes people get wrong. Because penal substitution is about Jesus taking the wrath that we deserve. Sometimes it has been described as divine child abuse, almost as if this angry, abusive God has to punish somebody, so he decides to punish his son unjustly. And we're naturally repulsed by the idea of child abuse, and we're repulsed by this idea of this angry God who just has to unload on somebody. But that doesn't give you the accurate picture of penal substitution, because it doesn't give the accurate picture of what's going on the cross. Remember that what happens on the cross is God himself coming down. It is God himself entering humanity and going to the cross on our behalf. It's not an angry God who's unloading on his unwitting son as if it's some divine child abuse. It's God himself willingly, desiringly, out of love for his creation and his people, going to the cross to bear the penalty for our sins. We have to remember the incarnation in order to correctly understand penal substitution. This is not a ridiculous random God. This is a God who loves so much that he's willing to sacrifice himself. That's a powerful image. So today we're just going to think about theology a little bit and why Jesus must suffer. So take a look at those two videos, and I hope you find them helpful.